There are vehicles on American roads right now with over 400,000 miles on their original engines, never rebuilt, never replaced, running the same rotating assembly that rolled off the factory floor decades ago. And the owners of these vehicles share one habit so consistent and simple that when you hear it, you'll wonder why nobody told you sooner. A 2006 Toyota Tundra with 547 000 miles. A 1996 Honda Accord with 410 000 miles. A 1998 Chevy Silverado with 360 000 miles. These aren't myths or marketing stories, they're documented owner reports with maintenance records. Researchers who study high-mileage vehicles consistently find that the single factor separating engines that die at 120 000 miles from engines that survive past 300 000 miles has almost nothing to do with brand, model, or even luck. It has everything to do with one golden rule that costs almost nothing to follow, yet is ignored by the majority of drivers every single day. Keep watching, because I'm going to build the case for this rule piece by piece, starting with what really kills engines, what keeps them alive, and finally, the one non-negotiable habit that ties everything together. Hey, if you like this kind of straight-to-the-point content with no BS, help me out here. Subscribe to the channel right now. It takes 2 seconds and guarantees you won't miss any tips that could save you some serious cash. Let me start not with the golden rule itself, but with what actually kills engines. Because understanding failure tells you everything about survival. The number one cause of premature engine failure isn't hard driving, it isn't extreme weather, and it isn't even cheap parts. According to a study by Briggs and Stratton analyzing thousands of engine failures, and supported by independent findings from automotive engineers, the overwhelming majority of internal engine damage, somewhere between 60 and 70%, is caused by particles smaller than 20 microns circulating in contaminated oil. To put that in perspective, a human hair is about 70 microns thick. The particles destroying your engine are invisible to the naked eye. These microscopic abrasives come from combustion byproducts, metal particles shed during normal wear, dust and dirt that bypasses the air filter, and degraded oil additives. When oil is fresh and clean, these particles are either captured by the filter or suspended harmlessly by detergent additives. But as oil ages, 2 things happen simultaneously. The filter becomes saturated and allows particles to bypass. The detergent additives deplete, losing their ability to keep particles suspended. Once these particles circulate freely, they act like liquid sandpaper inside your engine, scoring bearing surfaces, scratching cylinder walls, and accelerating wear exponentially. Here's where it gets interesting. This damage doesn't announce itself. There's no warning light, no unusual noise, no change in performance in the early stages. The engine simply wears faster than it should, invisibly, mile by mile, until one day it crosses the threshold where repair costs more than replacement. Now think about the engines with 400,000 miles. What do they have in common? The owners didn't use exotic oil, they didn't avoid highways, they didn't baby the engine at every red light. What they did was interrupt this contamination cycle consistently before the particles reached critical concentration. They changed the oil, regularly, every single time. The second piece of the puzzle is thermal stress, which is the hidden accelerant that most drivers never consider. Every time you start a cold engine, you subject metal components to something called thermal cycling. The repeated expansion and contraction of metal as temperature rises from ambient to operating temperature around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Over hundreds of thousands of cold starts. This cycling creates microscopic fatigue in metal, weakens gaskets and seals, and gradually loosens precision fits between components. Here's the part nobody tells you. The severity of each cold start depends directly on oil viscosity at the moment of startup. Cold oil is dramatically thicker than warm oil. A 5-weight 30 oil at 20 degrees Fahrenheit flows roughly 4 times more slowly than the same oil at operating temperature. During those first 15 to 30 seconds while oil is thick and hasn't fully circulated, engine components operate with reduced lubrication. Bearings, camshafts, and cylinder walls experience metal contact that wouldn't happen with proper oil film thickness. Studies in tribology, the science of friction and wear, confirm that a single cold start generates as much engine wear as 50 miles of warm highway driving. Multiply that by 12 cold starts per week over 10 years, and you're looking at the equivalent of over 300,000 miles of additional wear just from startup events. But here's the critical variable. The quality and cleanliness of the oil during those cold starts determines how much wear actually occurs. Fresh synthetic oil with high viscosity index flows faster when cold than degraded conventional oil. It reaches critical surfaces sooner. It forms a stronger film under the pressures of startup. This is why the cars reaching 400,000 miles aren't just changing oil on schedule. They're using the right oil and not letting it degrade past its protective window. Now, let me give you the secondary habits that support extreme mileage. Because the golden rule works best when combined with a few supporting practices. High-mileage engines share these patterns, almost without exception. Cooling system maintenance is treated with the same priority as oil changes. Coolant degrades over time, losing its corrosion inhibitors regardless of mileage. Old coolant with depleted inhibitors allows rust and electrolytic corrosion inside the engine block, coolant passages, and water pump. The resulting debris circulates through the system, damaging the water pump impeller, clogging the heater core, and eventually causing overheating events that warp cylinder heads or blow head gaskets. A single severe overheating event can end an otherwise healthy engine. Owners of 300,000-mile vehicles change coolant every 2 to 3 years, without exception. They also replace thermostats preventively every 100,000 miles because a failing thermostat causes erratic temperature regulation that accelerates wear. Air filtration is taken seriously. The air filter is the only barrier between road dust and your engine's cylinders. A dirty filter restricts airflow, causing a richer fuel mixture, increased cylinder deposits, and worse combustion efficiency. A torn or improperly seated filter allows abrasive particles directly into the combustion chamber. Owners of extreme mileage vehicles inspect air filters every oil change and replace them at the first sign of significant contamination rather than waiting for a fixed interval. They also check that the filter seats properly in its housing with no gaps. Driving habits matter more than most people realize. High-mileage engines often belong to highway commuters rather than city drivers, and the reason is thermal cycles. A driver who travels 60 miles to work on the highway makes 2 cold starts per day, reaching operating temperature and holding it for the majority of the drive. A city driver, making 4 short errands, makes 4 cold starts per day, often never fully warming the engine between them. The highway driver subjects their engine to 30 to 40% fewer cold start wear events per mile driven. When city driving is unavoidable, owners of high-mileage engines compensate by extending oil change intervals in terms of months, rather than simply miles, because time-based degradation and cold start contamination accumulate faster than odometer-based calculations assume. Now, here's the golden rule that ties everything together, the single non-negotiable habit documented in nearly every extreme mileage engine ever studied. It isn't using synthetic oil, though that helps. It isn't avoiding hard acceleration, though gentle driving extends component life. It isn't choosing a specific brand of vehicle, though some engines are better engineered than others. The golden rule is this: never let the oil change interval lapse. Not once. Not even by a few weeks. The data on engine longevity shows a striking pattern. Engines that reach 300,000 and 400,000 miles were almost never subjected to a single neglected oil change. Not one skipped interval in hundreds of oil changes over decades. The reasoning comes back to the contamination cycle described earlier. Oil protection degrades gradually and non-linearly. The last 20% of the oil's useful life corresponds to roughly 60% of its total contamination load. Allowing oil to run 10 or 15% past its change interval means running the engine on heavily contaminated, additive depleted oil that permits the microscopic abrasive damage that accumulates invisibly until the engine fails prematurely. Professional oil analysis, companies like Blackstone Laboratories, have analyzed thousands of samples from high-mileage engines. Their data confirms that engines reaching extreme mileage maintain low wear metal concentrations throughout their service life, meaning the individual oil changes consistently happened before wear rates increased. By contrast, engines that failed prematurely showed evidence of periods where wear metal spiked, indicating the oil was allowed to degrade past its protective threshold at least once. So here's the complete formula. Use full synthetic oil meeting or exceeding your manufacturer's specification. Change it without exception at the manufacturer's recommended interval, or at half that interval if you drive primarily short trips or in severe conditions. Maintain the cooling system on schedule every 2 years regardless of mileage. Replace the air filter at every other oil change or sooner in dusty conditions. Drive gently for the first 5 minutes after cold starts. And above all else, treat the oil change interval as an absolute deadline, not a suggestion. The vehicles with 500,000 miles aren't miracles of engineering. They're miracles of consistency. The golden rule isn't exotic. It's just never letting the oil run past its useful life, not even once, for as long as you own the vehicle. Do that consistently, and a 300,000-mile engine is not luck. It's the expected result.